Ever since I started making TFD videos, the most requested video from you guys has been Gley. Gley, Gley, Gley. You guys would not shut up about it. And every time I would tell you I wasn't ready for her as I needed to add more and more to my calculator site before I could talk about her. Well, now I'm ready, so let's do it. I'll clarify right now that Gley will be split into two videos, the Massacre build discussion and then the Gun Gley discussion. And this video is going to be about Massacre, as well as the ongoing debate between Python and Blue Blood Bloomer regarding which is better as her stat stick. Before we get into the builds and weapon debates though, we need to quickly discuss how Gley's abilities work on an individual level. Gley's first and most important ability is Frenzied. This acts like a state toggle on Gley and it modifies every single one of her abilities based on whether it is on or off. Like most of her abilities, it's going to cost HP to activate, and when Frenzied is active, you passively gain 15% firearm and explosive attack, which goes in the standard attack percent bucket like you would expect, and then it gives you an increase in penetration, reduces your healing amounts, and then increases the damage that you take from enemies. This might sound like a pretty big drawback, but once you understand the rest of Gley's kit, you're not going to give a shit anymore. The ability also has a Transcendent mod called Predator Instinct, which is a bit of a sad joke, and you're never going to find reason to use it, because Instinct makes it so instead of getting the bonus firearm attack from the get-go, you instead need to be holding down the trigger on a firearm to get the same bonus of 15% after a second of continuous fire. And after 2 seconds of continuous fire, the bonus changes from 15% to 21% total, not the 15% plus 21% that I've seen people think it was. And then on top of that, you no longer get an explosive attack bonus anymore, while still suffering from the same drawbacks as before. This mod needs more love than a mother could provide. Gley's passive is called Thirst, and makes it so when Frenzied is not active, you get passive damage reduction. And in general, regardless of the frenzy state, enemies defeated by Gley will drop life spheres, which on pickup will heal her and give custom resource. Her passive has a Transcendent mod called Blood and Iron, which makes it so enemies no longer drop the life orbs anymore, and you can gain custom resource instead by getting firearm crits. Although it's not guaranteed, it is a chance on crit to give it to you. Gley's second skill is called Life Siphon, which deals damage in an AoE while also healing you per enemy hit, and then if cast while Frenzied is not active, you gain a buff which gives you DR per stack per enemy hit, and then if Frenzied is active, then the base damage of the ability is increased by default, but it also makes it so your damage will increase based on how much HP is missing, and we'll talk about this for a second, because people are misunderstanding how this is calculated, but also this applies to literally any skill damage Gley can do on any ability so long as Frenzied is active. The tooltip will tell you that it increases skill power by 10% for every 10% of HP missing, and in terms of the math, the bonus functions identically to Bunny's electricity bar, in that it applies after the power optimization bonus, but before any faction skill attack gets factored in. If you're uncertain of what anything I even said means, please go watch the Reactor and skill power video for an explanation on all of that shit. The significantly more important info to provide you guys here, though, is that like Bunny's bar, it is bugged on the increments for which the bonus scales. This means that if you are already at full HP, it treats it as if you're already missing 10%, giving you the first stage of the bonus. Why does this matter? Because a lot of people out there are forcing Gley down to almost 0 HP thinking that that's the only way they're going to get the bonus. But if you already have 10% up front and the bonus caps at 100%, that means once your HP is in the 10 to 20% range, you're already actually getting the full bonus. In most cases, this is kind of irrelevant, but there are definitely going to be a few, or maybe you just want a tiny little bit of HP to survive a single hit before the boss gets staggered and then obliterated by your massacre. Speaking of weird shit though, because someone is probably going to mention overwhelming shield or overwhelming defense and suggest that we use that to force Gley's HP to 1? No, you should not. Even if you were in a scenario where it was usable, using a forced 1 HP mod on Gley will give you the 10% bonus as if you were at full HP, and then it will give you another 10% for some reason, despite you missing 99% of your health, but it won't give you the full bonus. Do not ever use a 1 HP mod on Gley. Her third ability is Increased Sensory, and this skill is her bread and butter. It enables both Gun Gley and Massacre Gley builds. If cast when Frenzied isn't active, you get a speed bonus and recover health. Big whoop, nobody fucking cares. But if cast when Frenzy is active, then you get a buff where while active, any ammo used is not consumed for the entire duration. And the duration here, while small, is modified by duration bonuses. This means in general, the idea would be to stack as high a fire rate as you possibly can on a regular weapon, since fire rate scales your rounds per second towards infinity the more you have of it. And if you watched my recent video on the weapon core system, you already know about that. And while it's unfortunate that cores don't benefit unique skill weapons, this ability still does, and that's where Massacre comes in. Massacre is the 4th skill, and this thing has the potential to be so much cooler than it is, but let's talk about how it works. When cast, you summon the weapon, and the amount of ammo you start with is based solely on the amount of custom resource you had when cast. I say solely because a lot of people are going to be thinking that magazine bonuses are going to help her here because they help on Freyna or Haley. They might help on Freyna and Haley, they do not actually help here. So if you have 10 custom resource, you get 10 ammo. If you have 1 custom resource, you only get 1 ammo. And that may seem like piss in the wind, but remember that Sensory gives you a duration of infinite ammo. So the question isn't how much ammo do you have, it's how best to use the ammo spam. When cast when Frenzied isn't active, the weapon will deal identical damage to your equipped weapon, while also inheriting the weapon's crit rate, crit damage, fire rate, base attack, so on and so forth, but it will also stun enemies on hit. And then if you cast it while Frenzied is active, it still does the firearm damage as the non-Frenzied version would before, but in exchange for losing the stun on enemies, you gain a skill damage section similar to Haley's Zenith, and that skill damage is boosted by the HP bar missing as discussed before. For those unfamiliar with Haley, we will reuse the screen from Haley's latest video, which gives an easy way to think about it. Basically, every shot from Massacre while Frenzied is active will use 1 ammo, right? But it will essentially shoot 2 bullets, the firearm bullet and the skill bullet. The firearm bullet deals firearm damage, is only modified by the firearm mods on your equipped weapon. Its crits are only boosted by firearm crit bonuses, so on and so forth, and the firearm bullet can hit weak points. The skill side is only boosted by character mods that boost skill damage, skill crits, your reactor, so on and so forth. Skill damage mods will never boost the firearm section of the damage, and firearm mods will never boost the skill side of the damage, with the singular exception of fire rate, since Massacre can benefit from Sensory, and with enough duration you're going to get around 9 or 10 seconds max with infinite ammo, meaning the higher fire rate you have, the more shots you will get, and the more shots you get, the more skill damage you get. And this is where we're going to tie into the debate of Python versus the rare weapon Blue Blood Bloomer. And the debate is basically this. Python has a base fire rate of 923 rounds per minute and has more damage per shot, but Bloomer has a fire rate of 1000 RPM, which is more, but less damage per shot. Before, the math always favored Python because in order to use Bloomer, you had to use a non-ultimate reactor. And if you've watched the reactor video, you know that is a huge damage loss. But we recently got the ability to implant weapon classes on reactors so we can specify submachine gun and use anything in there instead of being limited to 1 ultimate weapon. So the question has become, now that Bloomer can be used on an ultimate reactor without a damage loss on the skill side, can it perform better than Python due to its increased fire rate? And I am here to tell you, fuck no. No, it does not. Python gets a whopping 2 times base weak point modifier. So the answer does technically depend on your weak point hit rate, but if you're able to hit weak points with, if I recall, it was 15% or more of your shots, Python wins. So Bloomer will only ever pull ahead if you are only aiming for body shots, or if your aim sucks shit. Normally, I am always on the side of assuming you guys can't aim for piss. But guys, a 15% weak point hit rate is like the barest minimum that a human being should be able to accomplish. So basically, no. Bloomer will never be good. Python is always going to win there. Unfortunately, however, the reality is that it doesn't actually matter which weapon you choose between these two because the damage of either of them is going to get fucked into the ground. This might confuse quite a few people given that we show in this very video that you can do a gajillion damage to Colossi and you've seen probably a lot of speedrunners using Massacre Gley on YouTube, so how can that be right? And it's because of fire rate. We already know exactly how fire rate works, how it's calculated. We can measure out the benefits of like the fire rate up mod or sharp precision shot, and I can tell you exactly how many shots you'll get on your Lepic or Freyna with dynamic fire rate bonuses in effect. However, on higher fire rate weapons, all of that goes out the window, and nobody, not with their websites, not with their spreadsheets, not with their calculators, literally nobody can give you accurate fire rate math once your fire rate starts approaching 500 plus. And it's not actually anyone's fault but the game. For those who are not already aware, your fire rate is directly modified by your frame rate. The easiest way to show this is with Enduring Legacy, which has a decently high fire rate, but also has a huge magazine. And in this example, we'll measure the amount of time it takes to empty the full magazine, starting from the moment the first bullet is fired to the moment the last bullet is emptied in the magazine. And you can see that despite the mods being exactly the same, they only have magazine mods on. The recording done on the lower frame rate has a significant difference in the time required to empty the magazine, meaning fire rates are different between these two instances. The problem only grows further because it's not just FPS that modifies your fire rate. The very performance of the game itself will also change it. So if you're in a group with an Inez and a Freyna and they start lagging your game, your fire rate is going to go down the shitter too. And the higher your fire rate is, the more pronounced this issue becomes. The end result of which is just that Massacre gets its damage fucked into the ground. It already does a lot of damage, but if fire rate worked how it should be working without these batshit crazy off-the-wall constraints, then Gley would have the damage to kill literally any solo boss in 6 seconds or less. They wouldn't even be able to try and frenzy, they'd just be dead. There's a lot of people out there crying for a Gley buff, and I have to disagree. Gley is already strong as fuck, guys. What needs to change isn't Gley. What needs to change is how the game handles fire rate, because until then, it won't matter if they buff Massacre. The only other realistic alternative is to take the Lepic approach and make it so Massacre does shitloads more damage per shot on the skill end, but then to kill its fire rate and make it shoot slow as hell, and I'm pretty sure all of you Gley enjoyers would throw a royal bitch fit if they ever did that. If you want to argue to get Gley stronger, I don't mind, just make sure you're arguing for the right thing, that's all. Otherwise I will fucking smack you. Massacre Gley has some of the highest damage potentials in the game, not to mention DPS. The game simply cannot keep up with it. To wrap up Transcendent mods before we get to the builds, the most usable is going to be Massive Sanguification, a mod for her second ability which changes it so that way when you're not frenzied, you don't do damage anymore, you still get healed, and then when you are frenzied, you get custom resource without having to kill an enemy. This is going to be key for Massacre boss builds, as in a boss fight you have no practical way to generate resource other than this mod, and since Massacre's damage doesn't depend on getting a full bar of resource, rather just your ability to trigger Massacre in any case, this basically enables any Massacre build in a boss fight, period. And without it, you're going to be in for a miserable fucking time. Another Transcendent mod is Demonic Modification, which modifies Massacre itself, and this mod is actually cracked. If it weren't for the fact that using this mod means you have no way to activate Massacre in a boss fight, this would be her best mod without question. Demonic changes Massacre to have a fixed fire rate of 60 rounds per minute, it pumps the skill damage when frenzied up by quite a bit as opposed to what it had before, and then it makes it so the longer you hold the aim before firing, up to a maximum of course, the larger a damage multiplier you get on your firearm side of the damage. Basically this means that in a perfect scenario you'll be able to use a high base damage weapon without needing to care about its fire rate, so you could use something like Piercing Light, which will have its fire rate then changed to 60, and then if you hold the aim long enough to get a max charge, you get a 5.74 times damage multiplier. And this thing works the exact same way that Haley's Zenith multiplier does, but Zenith is only a 1.5 times multiplier. Though again, when using this mod, it means you can't use Sanguification. And if you aren't going to use Sanguification, it means you have no way to get resource in the middle of a boss fight, and it's not going to work. However, in a dungeon, if you ever want to blow a hole into the surface of Mars, this mod will let you do that. Also, regarding the extra damage multiplier, I know it says skill, but it's just firearm. This is a UI bug, or it's just a really weird bug because they need to fix it, and that would mean that the skill damage should be doing 5.7 times more, along with the 2 times multi from having low HP, meaning skill damage would deal up to over 10 times more than that in that case. But I'm not a fucking developer for this game. How the shit should I know? Quick quirk though, normally Massacre inherits the physical type of the weapon you have equipped, right? So if you're using a crush weapon, then it makes Massacre a crush weapon, or at least that's what it should do. However, when Demonic is equipped, and only when this mod is on, it forcibly changes the damage type of Massacre to be burst, no matter what. This actually threw me for such a loop when I was testing her out on stream. It took me way too long to figure out what the hell was causing the damage discrepancy. The last Transcendent mod to discuss is Super Senses, which modifies her third ability and makes it so, for some reason, the ammo buff fixes the fire rate of any weapon you're using down to 48, and then it just increases the base duration from 5 seconds to 8 seconds. The increased duration might sound interesting, and I'm sure most of you are thinking, okay, so this would obviously be good for a weapon that has a fire rate less than 48, right? Sure, but no. The lowest fire rate in the game is already 48 on Piercing Light, so what's the fucking point in having a longer duration in exchange for forcing your fire rate to be the lowest, the literal lowest in the game, while also sacrificing any fire rate bonuses you may have had on your mods? I used to think Glacial Cloud was one of the dumbest Transcendent mods in the game, but I gotta say this one takes the cake. This one needs to be deleted and reworked ASAP. Now let's talk about the build and the mods. We don't actually care about survivability. Building into HP would be pointless, as the abilities cost 8% of your HP, and in the end you want to be lower anyways, so it would be moot. However, since we want our duration as high as possible, we do bring Battle of Stamina, along with skill extension and maximized duration. Obviously, we just want to prolong the infinite ammo buff. In terms of skill power ratio, for non-attribute ratio, we have the corresponding Amplification and Syncytium mods, and then on base power ratios, we have maximized skill, along with the Slayer set adding in there, and then on power modifiers, we have Dimension Amp, Maximize Power, Iron Defense, and then Walk a Tightrope. Some people are probably going to be surprised to see that in there instead of Dangerous Ambush. But guys, unless you have the boss staggered for something like 70% of the time, and that is sure as shit not a realistic estimate on any boss for ambush uptime, then that means Tightrope is always going to be the winner. There's basically no timeline in which ambush is going to be better for Massacre Gley. When it comes to mod swaps, I personally don't enjoy this build, but if you want to do max cooldown for instant recast on your ammo buff, you can use the mods on screen instead. You do lose damage across each cast, so your DPS is going to go down to the shitter, and you'll also have to micromanage your ammo, so that way when the ammo buff does expire, you don't accidentally use the remaining shots on Massacre, so that way you can recast and keep Massacre up without having to recast that as well. But if you're going to do that, I kind of just don't see the point where you do that and not use Lepic instead. The strongest arguments for recast Gley are on Swampwalker or Gluttony, but Lepic can kill either in one phase without needing to micromanage your duration, without accidentally using up your ammo and ending Massacre prematurely. This isn't to say that Lepic is better than Gley, because in pure theoreticals he's not even close. I only mean to say that the cooldown build on Gley, specifically, seems like a dumb fucking idea over other options with other characters. On your Reactor, you want Colossus attack and dimension ratio. I see a lot of people arguing for duration these days, but guys, the difference between the two is microscopic. Technically, duration gives more total damage, but dimension is only like 0.18% lower on the total damage. And if they're both equivalent, the correct answer is always to deal the same amount of damage in a shorter amount of time, which means don't use duration. It's usable if you have it, but given a choice between the two, always take the dimension boost. For components, it's just going to be the Slayer set. You only care about the base power ratio bonus from the 4-piece effect, because she has neither shields nor MP. The subs are literally squandered on her. You do not care at all about what the rolls are on the components themselves. You are only bringing Slayer for the sake of having Slayer equipped. Now for the weapon. Obviously, given what I said earlier, this is going to be Python. For the cores, you don't care, as if you watch the core video, you already know that core bonuses do not, in any way, shape, or form, benefit skill weapons, alright? On the subs, though, those do. You want weak point damage, crit damage, firearm attack, and Colossus attack. Technically, crit damage is the weakest link here. If you get an elemental roll instead, it's not the end of the world, but it's just not optimal, that's all. The weapon mods are as follows on screen. I trust all of you can hit the pause button, but please, please listen to me when I say that Overwhelm is only on here for Gluttony. As Gluttony's knee, the balancer is a burst weakness, and Python is a burst weapon. And due to that, Overwhelm is a ridiculous damage increase in that very, very specific scenario. Otherwise, you should always swap Overwhelm with better concentration instead. And then that is it, guys. I had a lot more to talk about and had to trim this down quite a lot from what I initially planned in this video. But come back next week for part 2, in which I will discuss Gun Gley and all the options available there between your favorite rocket launchers or laser beams disguised as assault rifles. Gley is cracked as shit, guys. The only real downside she has is that the game literally is not good enough for her.